ones will be an application of culture-based development for artificial intelligence, an application of culture-based development for the knowledge economy, and application of culture-based development for regional development. This will be the design. Okay. So it has been a wonderful journey. This is the 7th presentation that I'm making for the first book. I call it the Caravan of Knowledge, and it has started through Europe, Rotterdam, Luxembourg, the heart of Europe. It went thanks to the gentleman over there, Michael Frisch, also to British Columbia, and one of the top economists there and social psychologists who are working on culture were also introduced to this thing, and they were very welcoming to be among them. Well, it comes here and it will stay here for a while, the caravan, because there is yet another meeting, which is the EIP, the European Political Economics Group, which has also a lot of institutional economists who are one of the classical cultural economists that exist out there. So it will finish the little tour of the summer with this next conference. Of course, there are many different societies behind these conferences. Each of them has different specialization. So there was the ISQs, which is the Quality of Life Studies Association. This was the Luxembourg meeting. They are very dear to my heart and a wonderful community. And of course, ERSA is the place where I started. So it's, however, more regional. Although there are here people now both attending the previous conference and working on well-being as well. So a little bit of a person. I am a vice president of ISQs, so I have to advertise them a little bit as well. They are quite nice people. They have regional economies, but they have higher accent on the social aspect of development in Athens. Also cross-based. This said, how this session today will go. I don't know whether we managed to start recording. Thank you. This is the most wonderful thing. These are the people that are here with me, the people who are working on culture-based development projects, the people who are PhD students or already graduated PhD students and now postdocs working with the CBD party. So Samira, the youngest, the child of culture-based development, then equally young but already progressed into an alumni, Yashi, and Tom, the one and only, who is really helping us now also with the recording and everything, always. He's also a linguist, so I'm trying to convert him into a culture-based development person, as you can learn from the book, because language is one of the measurements of culture. So how we will proceed? I will talk for about 30 minutes. I was planning to talk for more, but I'll try to pack everything. And then there will be 2 more presentations, so this is meant as a round table. I will present the content of the book, and then we'll focus on 3 aspects of how you can see culture-based development from regional economics perspective in specific. Why culture-based development is a neo-Bavarian paradigm, the special issues that have been done in the past and that are currently open. So if anyone of you is willing to submit something, you're more than welcome. You'll see how they're structured. They're honoring the work of Max Weber on economics and religion and going into his footsteps. And then there will be a presentation of the CBD team. So the book is written for 2 reasons. People are asking me, so what's CBD? Okay, so well, go read the 50 papers. That's really not a nice and helpful answer. So I thought maybe it's time that, since I have a much grown-up idea of what it is, to put now these principles somewhere for reference. The second question that I get very often is, who else does CBD besides you? Well, there's actually a huge team of people behind it. There are a lot of co-authors, there are a lot of students. So I will present you the special issues that have in them many people who have used the culture-based development paradigm. They're all special issues using the culture-based development paradigm in the footsteps of that. And then the presentations will be done by 2 alumni of CBD, as I already told you. First we will hear Yashi, and then Samira, and then I'll step in again because I have a small surprise for them. And we proceed. So, what is the content of the book? I said main definitions, main notions, and then effects, direct and indirect. At the end, there is chapter which is called Beyond CBD. This is because my paradigm, which is quite multidisciplinary, is also honoring the philosophical thinking of Wittgenstein and for literature, and also Nietzsche. So beyond good and evil. This is the way the culture-based development looks on culture. There is no bad culture or good culture. Certain way of cultural state can be good for certain outcomes and bad for other outcomes. This is also the approach of Yanakon, Lawrence Yanakon, who is also economics of religion, so again related a little bit with Weber, but he stays in the religious movement mostly. So these are the inspirations of the book. Why the book is orange, as you see it? Because there are two main books that inspire it. These are the Ariel Rubinstein, Modeling Bounded Rationality, and The Taste for Discrimination by Gary Becker. So both books are orange, that's why this was made orange as a continuation in honoring. Why does it have the hand? So that's Fatima hand and Hamza hand. Because this is a sum up of the main message of the book. Culture has the, and we come to the definition of this, right? Culture is a meta strategy for survival. A strategy how we have to value every trigger from reality in order to decrease the uncertainty of existence and communication with others and make it more predictable so that we free more space in our mind from an evolutionary point of view and we can function better and more efficiently. So this is an evonomic way of thinking about culture. It's evolutionary economics. Now let's see a little bit deeper how the book evolves. I was intending, yeah.
Just about the book and the cover of the book, no? You just described. There's little question in the subtitle. Why this bias, cultural bias?
I'll go to this.
Okay.
And please, no question because we don't really have too much time, so I'll try to pack a lot of message. At the end, we will try to cover some questions, so keep your questions for them if I haven't managed to answer, because this comes on the slides. I was planning the book to start first intuitively with all the definitions. So the first part of the book is about defining culture, defining cultural bias, defining cultural heritage and living culture, defining cultural entity. All these are main notions that you need to know in order to be able to make the type of analysis that culture-based development is doing. And I was first explaining them in a mnemonic way through a story, the story of Robinson Crusoe. When I started my PhD, a person in the institute where I was working said, well, you know, many famous economists have used the Robinson Crusoe story to depict their models. Can't you use it? And back then I wrote a piece of work. He liked it very much, but when I lost it, he told me though, keep it and one day you'll put it in your book. And I wrote it again. And I thought for space reasons, I won't put it in the book, but I put it on the website of the culture-based development concept, which you can see there, culture-baseddevelopment.com. So if you want to understand intuitively, or if you want to share with students in a more mnemonic way to remember what all these notions mean, you can use this story. It's, I hope, fun to read. And also it is specially designed to convey the meaning of every notion. Now, if you want to jump directly deeper into the content, then you have the definition of what culture is. What is then cultural capital? Once you know that there is this meta strategy, right, you have to understand it as an entity. How can you go into measuring it? You have to understand better the nature of this entity. So, cultural capital is a notion which comes from Bourdieu, from cultural theory. Why I had to find such a definition? Because when I started working, I made literature review about different cultural things, and everybody was saying, culture is very complex. We won't define culture, we start from. We will measure it in this and that way. And then I showed my literature review, which was 70 pages, okay, to Joachim Müller, and he looked at me and said, Annie, he read Okay, read every line. What is this? It doesn't have a definition, and the measurement is all over the place. And said, yeah, that's the state of the art. He said, no, we are economists. We need a definition, and we need a consistent measurement. I said, well, then I have to create it. And so, in the search of a valid definition, I look back at the reference book of Max Weber about the Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. My first copy was given to me to yet another wonderful person, Professor John Hall from Portland State University. That's made me a Bavarian scholar. All over the book, in the English translation, Weber is actually all the time saying attitudes. Attitudes, attitudes, attitudes. Attitudes of Calvinists, attitudes of Catholics. They are behind what people do. And then the calling which comes from religion influences their attitudes. So people have been oversimplifying his book, but if you read it, he was all the time talking about the attitudes. And if you go to Bourdieu, he also talks about the power of the attitudes. Okay? So I said, okay, so the lowest level to which you can disintegrate this cultural strategy is the attitude that you have to each and every element of reality. Now that's difficult because then the reality is quite big. But then you can think of it as a DNA of your behavior. So what you need is a sufficiently big sample that will represent and allow to replicate correctly the whole behavior based on culture. So you cannot under-quantify it, but you don't need to necessarily measure each and every attitude in the universe. You have to have a sufficiently big pool of data, and then how sufficiently is defined, it has to be according to the data availability. You can scoop as much data as possible, but then of course you have to have the proper approach to it, because if you just put a lot of indicators, this creates a lot of noise and a lot of collinearity and so then you have to use a data reduction method. So attitudes and the cultural capital, which is the power of culture to influence the attitudes. These are the ways that these two things define. You want to measure this power of culture too. When you have the cultural capital, it goes into two types. You have things which are inherited from the past, attitudes inherited from the past, and attitudes which are currently shaped. These are important because whatever you inherit from the past is your status quo. The more you consume of it, the more you engage with it, with these attitudes, the more you are rigid. You're not, changing who you are. The more you engage with new attitudes, the more you acquire new attitudes, the more flexible you are in how you change your behavior, your choice every next time. Now you need to make a best possible world, the two things in balance. You have to respect yourself in order to have some stability and sustainability in what you're doing, and to know when you're right to stick to it. But you have to have sufficient room for innovation, for curiosity, in order to learn, adapt, right? The evolutionary aspect of this is the need to adapt, because the reality changes, so if that's a survival code, it better have opportunity to adapt itself and to update itself, otherwise you'll perish. So correct reality. So you have to balance the cultural heritage and living culture in order to understand the balance within the entity. But this will tell you whether you'll be open or closed. Now, open or closed goes now to the bias thing. If you're closed, you're negatively biased. If you're open but in a balanced way, 50-50 for good and for old and new, then you actually do not have bias, right? You are rational. You are not bounded by culture. But this is an ideal case. We all know that people normally have bias in their behavior. And if you go into liking something, then you're positively nepotistically biased, right? And both things, whether you hate or love something, is boundedness. Only the one is aggressive, the other is favoritistic, but in terms of economics, it's not the optimal, rational way of choosing what is fair, by merit, to speak. So this was recognized, of course, by Gary Becker And he was talking about taste for discrimination, which is the negative cultural discrimination, and then nepotism, which is the positive cultural bias. That's not something new. And what he was saying is that the two things are identical as logic, but then we know from prospect theory that actually the negative feelings are twice factored in our behavior in magnitude in comparison to the positive ones. So all this is taken into consideration in the modeling of culture here. We have the cultural heritage and living culture obtained through the data reduction method. We measure the balance with them between the two by using the Shannon entropy measure. So Shannon entropy measures the balance in an entity between the elements. You know it from related and unrelated variety. It is used there as a formula, but here what is measured in terms of how balanced it is this entity culture and how the two elements of it, culture, heritage and living culture, are presented with it. I can go into details how it is methodologically done, but it's standardly using the principal component factor analysis for the data reduction. Although you can go in other ways of doing it, right? I have used also Canyon clustering and other data reduction methods, and in the book, you always have first the definition of whichever notion I'm going to, explaining how it plays a role in the augmentation of a model, standard economic model in cultural sense. And then I finished the chapter by giving literature, culture-based development literature that has worked on this topic, and then extended literature of other authors. Right? So first I put you into understanding clearly what CBD, and then I compare it with other writers by also giving you the insight in which papers of mine you can find the details of what I'm talking, the particular chapter. The bias, however, is a mix between this balance, the openness, but also the cultural distance. You're open or closed, but so this is a direction, but how big is your bias? This is determined by the cultural distance, right? And the cultural distance is the difference between your cultural heritage and the cultural heritage of the other person, their living culture and your living culture, right? So, but this is a difference, and whether you perceive this difference as good or bad depends on the entropy, on the balance. If you are in a balanced state, you just don't bother, don't factor it in the model, in your decision. If you are positively biased towards the person, then you have nepotism, a plus effect for the other person, so it is cultural proximity that you act upon with the magnitude equal to the distance that you have, the difference that you have. And if you have a cultural entropy, which is disbalanced negatively, and you have a cultural distance with the difference with the other person, now you hate them. And so if you have the same difference with them, but you're in a disbalanced state, and you perceive now this as distance with the other person, you act upon it with a negative sign and with double the magnitude from prospect theory. So that's how you know how the behavior will operate, what drives it, the attitudes, the balance between the attitudes, the difference of the types of attitudes that you hold and the person on the other side holds. Once you have this in place, everything works according to the taste for discrimination model. Okay? The difference is that in the taste for discrimination of Gary Becker, he says, given that you love or hate people by this percentage, given that the taste for discrimination is that big, what will happen with the model? And what I'm explaining and adding here is what gives it. It is the attitudes, their structure, their balance, and their difference. And then I adopt everything that he says. He says it matters when you're choosing a person or when you're dealing with the product of the person and you have the understanding that the product is associated with the same cultural origin, which is of course present in many studies that we have done about migration production, and so on. So this brings us to the direct and indirect effects here. I was planning to have education in.
Recording in progress.
But this is supposed to appear in the book on knowledge, so I kept it there. I put here two of the most classical examples. The one is the direct effect of a person who is migrating. You have to choose a place in Europe, right? And this place has as a characteristic of the choice culture. So then you think, am I distant from this place? Is this place open or not? And then I make the decision. And I also get my openness in my attitudes towards. And this I call cultural gravity. But essentially, always when you have an interaction between the cultural disk and cultural network, it's always a cultural gravity that creates the bias. Okay? This is a sort of generalization of the cultural gravity model. It's not only for migration. I give the example for migration, which is a direct effect. The indirect effect of this same choice is that once people and places exercise the cultural gravity during migration, you end up being, let's say, an entrepreneur in country X, and you need IT experts, right? And you yourself are a lovely person, you don't mind anybody from anywhere in the world. Problem is, your country is super nasty and it has not allowed people from India to enter, and they are one of the best IT experts. So then indirectly, your functioning is limited because of the existing bias somewhere in the system. Now this is known as spatial frictions effect in urban economics. But then there again, you solve a lot of equations which are making the model, and the result is, and by the way, given how you hate or love a place and how open you are to people and so on and so forth, this will determine the solution of the model. Like, yeah. So we end up again in the same question as with Gary Becker's model. So why do people love or hate a place? And this is what we are working together on with Michael, calling it the turtle and elephant problem of culture. If you do not define where this hate or love comes from, you have an infinite turtle, right? It's everything will be yet another utility, and another utility, and another preference. Where do these preferences and utilities come from? They come from how the brain was coded culturally through aesthetic education. We'll come back to it in a second. Let me give you the second example, the second set of direct and indirect effects. The second direct effect that I'm working on is what happens when you are relatively deprived. So it is the dissolving of the altruistic contract curve. In order to have two people able to cooperate, you use the Edgeworth box and you show how their preferences for dividing the endowments in the world divide according to their preference for the one and the other part of the world division into what they're deciding about. Like simplified decision, you have two things, two commodities in order to represent their preference for choosing one of them, right, and agreeing on them. And then the solution of the Edgeworth box, the contract curve, is where their indifference curves meet. They touch each other, they tangent to each other. The collection of these points where their marginal utilities are equal gives you the solution for agreement. So you can agree with people as long as there are certain combinations of your preferences and their preferences which are equal. Now, what is the magic of hate or love? What is the irrationality of that? Right? Even when something is actually a thing you like, right? When it comes from a person you don't like so much, you may avoid it or take less of it. If you don't like somebody, you don't read their paper, the paper actually may not be that bad. Example. So, however, there is an extreme case. If you feel relatively deprived, if you feel that every time that you and this other person are in a situation for survival, by merit you have equal merit for survival, but you see that they are the ones who are privileged and you are the left behind, then an extreme reaction follows. You attribute to them infinite loss okay? And then you attribute this each and every time you have to factor, their in your relative comparison. So essentially, whenever you take in consideration their marginal utility and your marginal utility, you put a minus infinity to theirs, and you can never end up with having an equity. Because you can never have an equity between yours and theirs preferences in your mind, your perception, you act upon your perception, and you cannot find ever anywhere in the whole space a point where you have convergence to have a contract curve. So the contract curve dissolves. So this is a corner solution. But when is this possible? When you have somebody so much relatively deprived. Right? This is when you have a cultural entropy going to minimum. When one of the clubs locally is always right, and any innovation, anything different is wrong. Right? So if you have cultural entropy equal to 0, you have the maximum cultural bias, you have those who are not, with the mainstream, completely marginalized and left behind. And of course, this goes into them not being able to agree with the status. The other cases, like the cultural gravity and so on and so forth, happen when there is a taste for discrimination, when the cultural entropy is between 0 and 1. So the first effects were for variation between 0 and 1 of the cultural entropy, and the second set of examples is for the extreme case of cultural entropy equal to 0. I don't talk about cultural entropy equal to 1, which would be when culture, heritage, and living culture are 50-50 exactly balanced, right? Because it's a very ideal case, and just like a perfectly competitive market, it doesn't exist, just like perfectly rational behavior is not so often. And it's not problematic. I mean, if you're rational, and then everything's fine. But we're talking here about modeling and predicting the cultural bias. So what is the result then from this disappearance of the altruistic curve, the indirect effect? Well, you have heard about Mr. Polanyi, right? So once there is relative deprivation, once one of the groups cannot ever get an equitable treatment, then there is a double movement, then there is ask for change of regime, and there is a disruption in the model. So these 7 and 9 are connected, and they sum up my work on ultra-right voting. This is called the Buchishman-Rothschild model. But in the interest of time, I will move further. If you have questions for this, more than happy to talk about it. Chapter 10, Beyond Good and Evil, offers you also a systematization table which gives you the existing other paradigms for culture. There are people who have worked for culture, not the first one, obviously. So I have used the Creswell and Creswell way of thinking about paradigms. There are positive paradigms. Here you will have Alberto Resina, whom I deeply love. You will have now the wonderful work of Alberto Vicin, who is also a public choice person, so a lot of this is inspired me. But they are just positive. They do not care about going so much into the definition of culture, or they work on just a trait, right? Which is okay for the theoretical model, but it doesn't tell you anything about the whole forest of attitudes which shape your culture. Then there are people who are just constructivists, so Bourdieu was wonderful, but he didn't really go into making empirical work. And then you have transformative people like the economics of culture, people like David Crosby. David Crosby is the person who is also engaging very much with cultural value and cultural capital and Bourdieu way of thinking, but he's only thinking within the premises of culture, right? He and all his, of course, followers, and he's a massively famous figure worker in the field. He has even written things in regional economics. But the big problem there, and this was demonstrated in the late Themis, who was talking about, you cannot talk about culture and count the impact of culture as if it's sandwiches, right? Of course you sell books and this brings some kind of part of the GDP, but this is nothing in comparison with the actual impact of culture in creating this bias, because the cultural bias that culture creates, right, is the thing that makes us able to cooperate or not cooperate, able to be productive and creative and innovative. So to put it straight, if you eat a sandwich, it goes into you, satisfies your belly, goes to the special place, and end of story. And then of course you can count the impact of this sandwich in terms of the money that you gave in order to feel better. When you eat a book, it enters into you and your brain. And the story begins there. Every time you take a decision, everybody you relate with, if they have read the book, you like them. If they don't like the book and you like it, you hate them. If the book is giving you an idea how to be innovative. So every single choice, every single step, this book will be part of your identity. You'll have acquired it. So this is a field of research between the cultural industries and the aesthetic education, and how it creates and influences the attitude, which is very severely under-researched. And it gives the information what will be the impact of the cultural industries on the economic system. So we have to work there and to work very seriously, because if we don't do that, we'll always not know how culture as an industry and as a sector is providing the aesthetic education. And it is damn important. We know that if we educate the mind and the skills, this gives us human capital, right? Luckily, at least till now, we were understanding that. Now there are some kind of steps backwards talking about you don't need higher education, which is a nonsense. But you have to educate also the sentiments. So emotional intelligence comes from the aesthetic education. And aesthetic education can be at school, but can be also after you finish school, the consumption and participation in the arts. This is what educates what you value, what you praise, and how you behave. So this has been the content. So the first is about culture-based, and then the impacts on development, right? I am explaining this in the book always from the prism and the methodology of economics. I told you I wanted to build a real solid treatment of culture. So when I talk about the attitudes, I don't just write an essay about it and tell you I'm writing a nice story with you. I'm using the model for a perfectly competitive market and firms taking the price that is offered by the market as a metaphor of explaining the behavior, and I'm applying it in the context of how do I take the valuation of my environment, how do I engage with the valuation that other people have about the trigger from reality, given to my uncertainty exposure, right? If I cannot afford it, if I'm always, a free rider of a sort, if I can afford it and benefit from it, I have a profit, then I engage with this culture because it serves the purpose of me taking a benefit, a gain for my survival from it, right? And this is how the story that I was telling you now is translated in proper public choice manner in the language of economics. Okay. Then I do the same when I explain how cultural entropy works. I'm telling them, well, if you have to decide whether you enter a market or not, you have a market entry game, right? And it depends on the preferences now of the two players. You can go into this on your own. This is the graph of the culture entropy and what it means to have maximum entropy of balanced cultural heritage and living culture, and how no matter whether you have cultural heritage prevailing or living culture prevailing, you will always be creating a disbalance. An extreme case in either direction will always give you a collapse of the entire system. This also links This last part links to the aesthetic education and the humanistic perspective now. How this matters, this proper economic methodology, how does it translate for policymakers, and how does it translate for aesthetic education point of view? Well, if you have things that engage you only with the heritage, or only with modern cultural experiences and participation, then you will always be in this balance. Engaging people with the cultural heritage from humanistic perspective is helping them know who they are. Engaging them with understanding the new identities, new curious situations is allowing them to reinvent themselves, to be curious, okay, to exercise this plasticity of the mind. So you need both. If you're too proud of the past, obviously you don't have enough curiosity about that. But if you're too curious and you do not know who you are, you do not have enough self-respect, you adapt ideas that are actually worse than yours. So you need to have the two things in balance. In humanistic perspective, know others, know yourself. Right? From a psychology point of view, they talk about inherited and acquired identity. Okay? And I will give you a part of this. So they're different disciplines, they use their different terminology, but they converge on the idea that you have to be in balance in knowing where you come from and having reinvention of yourself. Now, why is this important? Because there has been a lot of talk about, oh, cultural heritage is good or bad, and there is no good or bad. The question is having the balance. If you see that now, apparently you have more cultural heritage, more living culture, of course, you won't go destroy what you have, but you'll go invest now in the other aspect so that you bring them into balance, right? So this is a strategically minded management of the resource with understanding what will be the evidence-based effect from your intervention. Otherwise, it is just political will, doing something because you were enlightened. So this gives you an actual tool for making aesthetic education that has a curriculum of experiences that is balanced between cultural heritage and culture. And what's very important here, this is very different application of anything which will be in the vicinity of paternalistic approach. I'm not telling to people what to value. I'm providing them an experience which is balanced. It is like I'm feeding you in a particular way. Right? I'm teaching you to have certain skills. How you use them afterwards is up to you. Which is very different from nudging, where I want you to choose something in a particular way, and I'll put you in a situation where you feel like you have a free choice, but because if I'm a good person that works well, but unfortunately this in the hands of a dictator can work really dangerous, right? So you don't want that to be possible with the tool that you're designing. And this is sort of waterproof or manipulation proof against such kind of behavior. If you want to know more about the aesthetic education nexus and the policy application, there is a wonderful UNESCO OECD inspired observatory. The people who founded it were previous employees of UNESCO and OECD. Unfortunately, the main founder of it passed away very recently, very visionary person from OECD. But the idea is there, and there is a big team who is pushing forward. This is called the International Pascal Observatory. And this is the UNESCO learning cities, which are cities trying to make things in innovative ways, to reinvent themselves, right? And to be open to knowledge and to be this open-mindedness sort of how do we call it for the refugees, sanctuaries. So this is the mindset here. You create places which are sanctuaries of open attitude that is conducive to human flourishing and cooperation. And they have different aspects of work. They have people focusing on resilience, people focusing on religion. I'm leading the group which is issues related to religion. There are people who are working very intensively on ecological issues. They're spread across the world. They have many centers in all well distributed across the world, all sector directions, Asia, the Americas, Europe. Glasgow is one of the centers. In the UK, there are 10 cities that are part of the network. With them, we created a briefing paper on aesthetic education. Now, that's not only about culture-based development. In this setting, it is, of course, the museums, the European Museums Association is one of the members of this. They have work of their own. We helped some. So all of these people joined together and wrote this meta document that we also offer to UNESCO, explaining them how aesthetic education functions, how the different people, different stakeholders, the museums, the art sector, the people who are in policymaking and advisorship should act and should contribute towards this aesthetic education. And here, culture-based development is just the tool for creating the evidence-based measurement. So it's not all about culture-based development, but it is clearly related. So find it, it is briefing paper 30, you have the link there. So now, what's the time? Because I talked a lot. What time we finished? 11. 11.
No, 10:30. 10:30 because there is a coffee break.
Oh, we'll take a little bit of a little break. We can
I have
stay.
to present it in that.
Okay, I will take 10 minutes more. If you feel that you have to go, you of course can go. In order to talk like 5 minutes more for the rest of the presentation, then give the floor to the ladies who make their contributions. So let me tell you about the quest of Max Weber. Max Weber wanted to understand the role of attitude and religion, and he wrote an exploration of the impact of culture on local development in different geographies. So his first book was about the Occident and the Calvinistic religion, how it differed from Protestant and Calvinistic differed from the Catholic. Then he went into different geographies. His second book was about China. His third book was about India. And his last book, which almost was not finished in his lifetime, but he had it as an intention, and he wrote it in another book of his, which was describing the things like chapters, and then they were developed into books separately. He intended to write on the whole Semitic world. So what is published now is the ancient Judaism, but he had also work on Islam, okay, in the post. Now, there are many ways that he was agreed and disagreed by these geographies. They welcomed him, or they thought they didn't understand them. Maybe he was wrong sometimes in what he had access to and so on. But he did this genuine quest at the time with the resources for searching information that he had. And it was an exemplary, excellent work. So what I do is making special issue in the footsteps of Max Weber. My first special issue was done with the co-special issue editors. One of them was my PhD supervisor. So back then I was a student and I was with two professors. This is in International Journal of Manpower, and it is all about culture in the Occident. Then recently I made second special issue, which is applying the culture-based development paradigm on the regions of India. Just like his second book is about India. Right? This was also coinciding with the 150 years of the birth of Max Weber. And then we have now, so these are already published. The second one is published in the Journal of Economic Issues, which is the journal of the all institutional economists that I will meet at the end of next month. Now there is a special issue in Region, the official journal of ERSA. I'm saying it with all my heart. I work wonderfully with Gunter Meyer and the whole team, wonderful group of people. They have ambition to make this journal go from strength to strength. And there will be a special issue on the regions of India. our beautiful Yasha here is a co-editor, and we're working also with the head of the India regional section. She's also one of the editors. Bhagya Pathyay, in the same time, in parallel, in the International Court of Life Studies that I told you about, which is more focused on quality of life, I will have a special issue on the Semitic world. So how the Semitic world has differences in their well-being and welfare across the world. Now this is interesting because you're invited to make comparison between groups and within groups. Right? So one of the contributions will be about Iran and the Iranians and their attitudes before and after the Iranian Revolution. The other one will be what is the position of the Kurds, who are Islamic followers, and the local population. And this will be written by a Kurdish colleague who is part of the Pascal network. Right? And then there will be contributors from Israel, right, who are writing on wonderful work that they have already presented in iSchools, which are actually showing a natural experiment of the effect of the war on the exposure to post-traumatic stress renewal. Right? People who have survived this stress, how they react now, compared to people who haven't been born and exposed to this trauma. So they're really good quality papers. They'll follow the culture-based development paradigm, and they'll be done from people who are working genuinely on these questions from around the world. And you are more than welcome also to submit, if you're interested in either India or the Semitic world. My special issues normally have the structure of introversive and extroversive approach. So you can make things within India and within the Semitic, this is even broader, right? The Semitic basis. But also you can make extroversive, which means if you're working on India, you can make a comparison between India and the rest of the world. So India and the US, India and anywhere in Europe, and so on. So this is now moving to the very fast to the last bit for the next 2 minutes. Who built CBD together? Yes, I was inspired. This was my project, but there were many people who stood behind. In this face, many of you know him. This is Joachim Elgar. He was the person with whom we wrote collected the first special issue. Then the next special issues are done always with PhD students. The one of China, I worked with my first PhD. Well, no, I have 7 PhD students, and she was my first in the current university where I am. And then she was one really smart and bright lady. So this is Yue Day, who's already graduated and an alumni of culture-based development. Now, the special issue in the region is with Yashi. This is a picture from her recent graduation. This is her wonderful family. And this is the people who will be moving the culture-based development implementation in this direction, because also she will be working in this direction herself, right? She's a person who cares about this region, she has the competence about the information which will be in the papers. And then, here is Samira. I stole this picture from her participation in ERSA last year, because every year there is a special session on culture-based development. Here and at iSchools, this is a tradition of culture-based development. There's always a special session of culture-based development. She was presenting there her first paper back then. And she will be behind the editorial of the Semitic world together with me, and another wonderful lady who is not my student, but is actually in Bremen now. Her name is Ricarda, Ricarda Cohen. So this is a person that will not speak today, but was meant to be one of the presenters. This is another PhD student of mine, extremely intelligent and bright lady, Miriam Afan, also from Saudi Arabia, as Samira. I'm really sorry she's not here, she just didn't get the Schengen visa. but she was a person with whom we worked most on other regarding preferences and comparing how people carry their other regarding preferences from different countries of origin when they arrive in Saudi Arabia and they drive on the road. She found an extensive data set which is coming from the biggest insurer of cars from Saudi Arabia, who put a special black box that monitors the behavior of people and has also information which places these people come from. Are they Saudi or are they coming from another country, and which country? Then we augmented this data set, which was already very filigree about the richness of the person, the type of the car, all other details. We also put what was the institutional penalty in the country where they were originally from for breaking the law. So we have more and more information. She worked on all this, she created this data set, and a very interesting paper came out of it. So Miriam is not here, but she's with us in her heart and in her work all the time. So now, without further ado, I'll give the floor first to Samira. And she will tell you why she is a couch-based development scholar and what she has done in such and what her current activities. So Samira, the floor is yours. I only will ask you to take something to make it shorter, faster, maybe something like between 5 and 7 minutes.
Recording stopped.
No. We continue recording.
Actually, I have to change the background.
Okay. But
Is that okay? It is
Yeah.
your name.
I'll give you a sign when this 5 minutes.
Recording in progress.
Hello everyone, my name is Samira Nalki. I am a PhD student at Swansea University and I am a lecturer at Kingston University in Saudi Arabia. Today I will present part of my PhD research and I will start with the agenda. What I talk about today. I have 3 main points. Why am I a culture-based development scholar? What have I done as a CBD scholar? What is my unique value added to the CBD literature so far? I will start with the first question. Why am I a CBD scholar? My PhD research is about the impact of women's empowerment in economics development. This is study comparison between the UK and Saudi Arabia. So, since my research is directly with the culture and comparison between 2 different countries, the country from the east, Saudi Arabia, and the country from the west, the UK. This is the different culture context. So I needed a model that allows me to measure culture strictly and precisely. So CBD was the best choice for this because it uses multi-dimensional quantification of culture. This, unlike other model, it was simple or complication. This is the part of my data set. The biggest challenge I faced was that I am a pioneer in the topic of CBD in Saudi Arabia. So there's no previous study, no previous research before. So I had to create new and unique data set using indicators that measure living culture and cultural heritage, such as this one, the museum, the heritage sites, concerts, books, parks, Islamic school, female and male libraries, etc. yeah, cinema and pictures. Yeah. This is the practical application of CBD in a multi-dimensional way. Move the next question. What have I done as a CBD scholar? So far, I have a paper with my supervisor, Annie and Lauren, the title Taste for Discrimination and the Paradox of Female Entrepreneurial Supply, comparison between Saudi Arabia and the UK. So this is the part of my results. Here, I study the entrepreneurship, women's entrepreneurial intention for the Saudi Arabia and the UK. I will focus on CH and LC results. Cultural heritage and living culture. We notice that for the cultural heritage in Saudi Arabia, it was positive and significant. That means the cultural heritage.
You won't have time to go on the results. Just trace.
Okay. Was very important for Saudi Arabia, for women, driver for the driving for the entrepreneurship. But in the UK, neither cultural heritage and living culture nor has a clear effect. This is for my PhD plan. I have 3 papers. The first one I talked about the previous slide about the female entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia and the UK. The next paper about the well-being for men and women in Saudi Arabia, and this, the third one about the
It's down.
creative protection by women in Saudi Arabia. All the papers I went to research trip for Saudi Arabia to obtain the data set. It was not it was
Not really available. You can create the data set.
private and unpublished. The data I obtained came from the personal meeting and connection with some official person in ministries and authorities like Entertainment Authority, Education of Ministry, Labor of Ministry, also the Central Library. This is the last one. What is my unique value added to the CBD literature so far? My unique contribution are I am bringing the CBD in the Arabic world for the first time because I am pioneer in this topic. Also, I'm building unique data set on Saudi Arabia at the city levels in Saudi Arabia and book publishing. All the book in Saudi Arabia from the 1970 until now. And I'm showing the importance of cultural heritage and living culture for the entrepreneurship, well-being, and creative industry. For the this is my plan for the future plan, expanding CBD application to include labor markets and gender equality in the Arab world. Also, I'm applying CBD to measure well-being and quality of life indicators, and linking CBD to create industry, innovation, and the knowledge economy.
Okay, Era, sorry for pressing you to finish faster.
Recording stopped.
But
Just
the idea here is to illustrate that she has already selected certain topics. In them, she's always using cultural heritage and living culture as explanatory factor, be it for the well-being of men and women, be it for the creativity. When she talks about creativity, she has a terrific data set, which is all the published books in Saudi Arabia. right? Since from which year?
1970.
From 1970
Until
till
now,
nowadays,
yeah.
all of them, and then she has the author, whether it is female or male, she has the topics, the place of publication, and
Recording in
she can
progress.
see how the local culture predicts where these books are published and where the women are being, more dominant as authors of books and so on.
Thank
So,
you very much.
It's a thank you. And now, without further delay, the other jewel of the crown.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I have to leave because I have a call.
Okay.
But it's very interesting.
Hope to see you again. I remembered you and I was searching for you
Yeah,
after you
I
asked your
wrote
question.
down the time. Thank you so much.
Ah, wait a second. You can take
Oh,
this.
that's very good. Thank you. Thank you.
So now we take. There we go. Again, I'll give you 30 minutes.
I'll take it. So, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us all in the roundtable for culture-based development paradigm and the book. So, I am Dr. Yashi Jain, and today I am here to share my journey as a culture-based development scholar. So, today here I'm going to share not only my trajectory of work in culture-based development, but how it connects with the culture-based development paradigm developed by Dr. Annie Tubadji. So first I will highlight why I am a CBD scholar, then what have I done as a CBD scholar, and what is my unique contribution or the unique value added to the CBD literature. So here, why am I a CBD scholar? So my research question, my entire research explores culture as a factor for the circular economy. And to quantify the culture, that was the biggest issue. I had to find out something, a good paradigm which can quantify it completely, precisely, accurately. And that's where I found culture-based development, because it avoids under-quantification and under-specification of the model. Moving ahead, I'll be slightly quick, but if there are more questions, that can be addressed later on. So again, not only I studied culture-based development, but I looked for other paradigms as well. And to compare those paradigms with culture-based development, there is a grid by Creswell and Creswell, which can be found in the book in chapter 10. Positivism.
In the book of CBD.
Yeah, in the book CBD. So there is positivism, which focuses more on precision but lacks accuracy. There is constructivism, which focuses on more accuracy but less precision. Transformative, it is both quasi-precise, quasi-accurate. But under pragmatism, it focuses on both equally, precision and accuracy. And that is where the culture-based development paradigm falls on. And to know more about that, you can refer to the paper Was Weber Right, where it highlights the under-specification and under-quantification of model and how CBD avoids that. Okay, so further moving ahead, now moving on to what have I done as a CBD scholar. So I have worked on these 3 papers, and the first one was, obviously I'm from India, so the paper I have written was Culture-Based Development and Pro-Circular Economy Behavior in India. So these all papers here follows 3 different perspectives. The first perspective, or the first aspect, defines how circular economy behaviors depend on cultural capital. The second paper focuses on the aspect of how 2 different public goods in 2 different time periods can be predicted based on each other, and the background which is defining them is the culture, the local culture of a place. And in the third paper, I introduced peace as a public good, which was inspired by the work of Walter Isser, Peace Economics, and that was the first time I introduced
peace economy in the culture-based development paradigm. And again, here it was a cross-country analysis, and also the analysis was at different levels of aggregation. So this is the published paper, which can be found in Science Regionally. And then, so this is another paper in the handbook, in which we have used the data which I have collected for my second paper on vaccination from the tweets. So, as my contribution in the culture-based development paradigm, the last aspect I would like to highlight is how I have quantified culture. So, what sort of data I have collected. So, for the first paper, I collected data from Culture Literacy Survey for India, which highlights the observed data on cultural consumption. For the second paper, I collected data from World Value Survey and Understanding Society data, which highlights the self-reported data on attitudes. And in the third one, it was from World Value Survey compared to ST's weighted index of social progress. And all these data were collected to measure culture as living culture and cultural heritage. And how it was done? So this is just an example. So here you can see there are 17 cultural indicators. Now using principal component analysis, this whole entire data was reduced to two components, living culture and cultural heritage. And now you can see here, like, okay, there are two living culture factors I have mentioned there. Now how it is defined. So living culture performing, living culture TV. How the factors are loaded, on that basis they are defined. And now, lastly, moving on to what is my unique value added to the CBD literature so far. So all the research I have done so far, I can say, like, the circular economy behavior is predicted by culture based on the culture-based development paradigm, and then how an individual make choices for public goods is also predictable by the culture-based development paradigm, and peace as the last public good in the third chapter is predictable by CBD. And lastly, what I want to engage, how I want to carry forward my research. So, as you all know, India is very highly rich in culture. Also, we don't follow the throwaway culture. We believe in reusing, repairing, recycling, but still our problem of garbage management or our practices adaptability for circular economy is still very less. So I would like to explore more why even having rich culture and good values for reusing and recycling, we are not able to achieve what we want to achieve. So that is what my future plan is. And here we go. Thank you.
I told you she's a jewel. So thank you very much, both of you, for the intervention. The idea was to show you that these girls, they're making their PhD with me, but it's not a simple process. They have a very important mission. They're the bees that are collecting the data, and they're making this multidimensional measurement that culture-based development does possible in the geographies where they come from. And then on, they're also having now the skills of making culture-based development. Both of them are using the data reduction method, know how to obtain the living culture heritage, the entropy, in order to use domestically. So their method is the same. They create unique data sets. With this said, I want to give them both a small present, which is saying here, a note from the future, which has arrived on 25th of August, 2025. A brilliant young scholar extends supervisor's party. That's what they're doing, right? They are the people who have done papers already and published papers during their PhDs, and as you saw, they have ambitions, ideas, and desires to continue working on this trajectory. Yashi is very much in circular economy, so each and every one of them, Samira is very much on the balance between male and female rights. Everybody has their own pursuit, they have their own identity, and I celebrate it very much, and I believe they will do it for now if you have any questions, we have 5 minutes, so we can continue with that.
It was clear.
It was clear. Well, that's quite a good thing after so much talking, because it was clear. That's great.
Maybe you could say some more about the cultural industries and culture.
Yeah, this is an under-researched aspect which I highlighted more when I was in Rotterdam, where was the meeting of the cultural economists, the Association for Cultural Economics International. So the way that cultural economists, group, there are 2 subgroups of cultural economists, loosely defined. Some are economists of culture and some are cultural economists. So the economists of culture would always think about cultural industries, and at best will be thinking how people are willing to pay and how much profit, economic profit, they get. Now, Trosby has talked about cultural and economic value and has clarified that there is a cultural value on top of the economic value of cultural products. But this has had almost no traction sufficient in when we talk about the impact of culture and quantifying the impact of culture. It has a potential, he's a brilliant person, I absolutely adore his mind, but it was not taken enough by the group working with him. You understand? So this has remained as a little seed which is still to bloom and to give fruit. What the people who are cultural economists do, these will be people like Nathan Noah, right? They know that culture matters, it's interesting, but then they'll notice things. They'll notice that, okay, the cloud here seems to have played a role. Or even the sandal matters, right? And it's true. It's absolutely true. And if you don't notice that, you're blind, okay? You're completely blind if you don't hear this. But the point is that culture can be even more precisely predicted, because this matters, but it also matters where this corridor of the sandal passes. If it passes to places which are nowadays more open-minded, they will be reflecting this heritage in a more and less open manner than other places. So if you focus on an area that is relatively culturally homogeneous, right, the impact from the heritage there, the same heritage, will be just possible to distinguish in terms of distance to this corridor where the cultural corridor is. But if you have different territories where the corridor is passing and they have different culture, the impact from the same cultural corridor will have different magnitude, different extent to which it will be able to affect the local productivity and creativity. And now, this is more or less the same like a Bisin who looks at separate trades, right? He does very precise work, but he doesn't go into the whole impact of culture, what I call impact of culture. He does something very precise for how one attitude, such as trust, will be transmitted between generations, or one attitude, creativity, how it will be transmitted across generations. What we are trying to do is a special issue in small business economics, which will be about culture and culture-based development, and looking at a combination of Florida, the Roman Central perspective, culture-based development, so taking from everywhere the knowledge and bringing it in order to understand how the local creativity and innovation, right, is influenced by the cultural bias. And this is honoring the most recent work of Alberto Bisin, which was dedicated on the elite power and how the elite power creates a cultural bias that reduces the ability of new innovators to get by merit the recognition of their innovative ideas. Okay? He made it theoretically, and now Michael and also David Aldrich have suggested, it's already approved, and we will be putting the call soon. So if you're interested, you can try to submit. I think that there was something else I wanted to mention, but now it escaped my mind. So if you have another question, it's welcome. Yeah. Okay, then we can continue the discussion during the time. Thank you very much for coming.